Hi everyone, this is Againstime from grinderschool.com. Today I'll be doing something a little bit different than we typically do. I will be doing a hand history review in Universal Replayer. However, the players who will be reviewing is a Grinder School member, PGM 1971. We'll be reviewing this player's games. We'll talk about the things this player did well and the areas where they can improve. We'll also be at the same time reviewing a new structure on Pokerstars and the sit and goes where the ante begins from the beginning. This structure has been incorporated in some other sites for some time now, but it is a relatively new change for Pokerstars, and so I wanted to address it. Essentially, the result will be you'll be becoming a little more involved early on. There'll be more incentive to get involved in pots that we would have otherwise considered somewhat marginal. We'll go ahead and get started here. As with the games that I review of my own play, I'll be skipping over most of the hands that we don't become involved with early on. Some of these I'll look at a little more closely to see why this player may or may not become involved. This is perfectly fine to fold the Queen 10 here. Okay, had it been folded to this player here, they should be raising with 10-9. Obviously, we won't get to see because we get a raise from the hijack. Okay, Ace-King suited will be an open raise regardless of position. If a player opens before you, it's perfectly valid to 3-bet. I would say this 3-bet size is a little on the larger side. The reason why I say that is not that I have a problem with 3x 3-bets, but only that if this player gets called and they bet, say, at least 300 on the flop, it'll leave it only with 850 chips remaining, and you'll probably want that c-bet to be slightly larger than the 3-bet pre-flop. That being the case, I'd probably recommend a 3-bet of 250 or 275 to be a little more chip conservative here and allow more maneuverability post-flop, but the 3-bet itself is perfectly fine and standard. Okay, we get a call here. The flop is deuce deuce 10 rainbow. This player just shoves in. It looks like we get a fold here. It's a little bit marginal. I'm really kind of happy with the fold. If the shove had been, say, the size of the pot or smaller, I typically call. Only having to win one time in 3 here to show a profit, I'm typically happy to commit with the ace-king high. However, since the shove is a little bit larger than the size of the pot, I think a fold is very much valid, and there's still enough chips here to move on to the later stages. The 2550 will still have over 20 blinds, and the 5100 still over 10 for the shove stack. So this is fine. Once again, I would simply make the 3-bet preflop a little bit smaller is the only adjustment I would make. Ace-9 off is going to be too weak to raise this far out of position. We do see a fold here. Okay, even if this had been folded to PGM, he shouldn't be opening the Queen 9 offsuit from the hijack, and he correctly folds here. This is a little too tight. My general recommendation for players in the 25-50 blinds, even without an ante, is to raise King Queen into 6 players. With an ante, I generally raise it into 7. There are only 5 players behind us here, and it was folded to us. I would highly recommend opening this King Queen. I think it's a little too tight. In fact, with the ante present, I'd probably even be opening Queen Jack offsuit here, just to give you an idea. Any suited ace, any pair. But I would be opening this, and I think it's a little too tight of a fold. Easy fold with the Jack 7 suited into 6 players. Same here with the Jack 6 suited. It looks like we become involved here, or PGM does. We'll see what the decision is. Okay. You have a variety of options here. Folding the hand is the worst choice you can make. He correctly chooses to play the hand. However, there's a couple options we have on how the hand can be played. You can either shove, or you can limp here and see a flop. I honestly think the shove is the better play, and the reason why I say that is because if you shove here, unless one of the players in the blinds pick up a big hand, they'll almost always fold. This player will call you, and this player will fold will be the general result. You'll have yourself a heads-up pot with a lot of dead money, 280 chips of dead money. Being all in for an effective stack of about 740 is an excellent scenario. The limp is okay. it's a decent play. But the best play is to shove here and isolate this, most likely getting all in with the short stack. Even if we get another caller here, it's not disadvantageous to get all in a three-way showdown with a suited connector like this. It's unlikely to be dominated. So my critique on this would be it was correct to play the hand, but I would simply shove all in pre-flop, because if you limp and another player shoves, you generally won't be getting the odds to call. This player does see a flop here of 8 jack 10 2 clubs with 9 8 suited. It looks like we get a lead out and a call and then a shove here. They have an open-ended straight draw and bottom pair here. I would actually just recommend flatting this. This player does choose to get all in here. They do get called by king jack, and it looks like they'll draw into the straight and double up. Okay, king jack offsuit isn't open from the hijack. However, we do have an open before, so it's perfectly valid to fold here. Same thing with the ace-6 suited. It would have been an open had it been folded to this player, but since that's not the case with the raise before an early position, perfectly valid to fold the marginal suited ace. Sevens will be an open. I recommend it to the whole table, regardless of blind level, if you're the first to enter, but certainly into 6 players here, it should be an open. And that this player limps here. I'm not a big fan of that. I don't think it's an awful play. I think folding is the only awful play. Limping is not what I'd recommend, and the reason why is because if you limp here and a player makes it, say, 3x or 3.5x or 4x, you're not really getting odds to call. And if you get a shove from one of these short stacks, you're faced with a difficult decision. So I would just open it myself and then be willing to call like a short stack shove over the top if it were a reasonably aggressive player. We do get this shove over the top, which was possibly expected because of the stack size. As you can see, it's a difficult spot that forces PGM into a fold here. And so instead of limping here, I would recommend raising. This player seems to be correctly realizing, for the most part, when they should play hands, which is good. But the more aggressive route rather than the more passive one would be my recommendation. Other than the king-queen hand, though, every hand that should have been played has been. But just one spot where a raise instead of a limp, and one spot a shove instead of a call on the blinds. Easy fold here. See what happens with this. Obviously, you can't do anything with the shove in front of you, but this would be a decent open spot from the button, even with the short stack, and you'd be committed by odds to call that short stack should they go all in. It's like we get confrontation with the 8s. This is excellent. Basically, this player has about 16 blinds approximately. With one limper, you would just make it like 3.5x, 4x, whatever, and continue on. With 2 limpers, you can just shove pre-flop over the limpers. There's like 500 chips here to be won. That's like a quarter of the effective or the stack for PGM. Perfectly valid to shove pre-flop. I love it. That's what I would do as well. No callers. Accumulate a nice amount of chips here. Okay, we get a fold with this ace-10. I'm not sure if this is the right play or not. It depends on the player shoving. If a good reg or a loose aggressive player were to shove here, you would clearly shove to isolate. Shoving 10 blinds into 5 players, ace-10 will generally rank to be the best. I don't have a lot of information on this player and no HUD stats available, so I can't tell you to a certainty what would be the correct play. I will tell you that there will be some players you'll call against here, and some players you'll fold. Well, actually, you'll never call. You'll either shove to isolate or you'll fold. You'll never just flat call this, no matter what. And it's hard for me to know exactly which is the best play without having the information on the player. I would say you would probably shove in here about 50% of the time and call and fold the other 50%. It's pretty even. I'm not really sure if this is a mistake or the correct decision because, once again, I don't have enough information on this player. But it's worth noting that sometimes you'll shove here and sometimes you'll fold, and it's a pretty even decision, which you can discern the right play based on your history with this player and possible HUD stats. Fold here is correct. Okay, looks like they pick up jacks here. Raise to 300 is fine. Oftentimes in this blind level, you'll see me raise it to like 270 or 240. 300 is fine. Anything less than 3x is fine. Um, I don't like to start min raising until a little bit later than this, and I'm certainly not 3xing anything after like the 1020 or the 1530. So 300 is fine. So we get a defend from the big blind here. The flop is 5, 6, 7, 2 diamonds. It's fairly coordinated. However, the SPR, it's about 2.5 here. This will be a hand with the jacks that you'll have to commit on. We'll see exactly what happens here. Looks like we get a check. This player bets 600. That's a healthy size bet. It allows them to effectively get all in on the turn without overbetting the pot. I have no problem with that whatsoever. It's a very coordinated board. Betting 4/5 pot or 80% is very appropriate here. So excellent choice. We get a fold. Okay, here with the 3x raise, 3x raises, unless it's by a player who's very inexperienced, are usually indicative of strength in these later blind levels. As a result, I would recommend very rarely re-stealing over the top of them unless you have some information that this player is capable of making these raises and folding fairly consistently. Re-steal against the cutoff raise with 8-7 offsuit is in general fine. However, against this player, and this being a 3x raise, I would recommend a fold. It looks like that's what happens. Okay, it looks like we're 5-handed now. This structure will be top 3 get paid. It'll be 50% to first, 30% to second, 20% to third. Pretty standard in the payout. However, the antes do begin a little earlier. Just fold the queen 8. King 3 off is not quite good enough from the hijack in this blind level. I would recommend something like King 5 suited or better, King 9 offsuit. Okay, it looks like they pick up pocket 10s here. We get an open shove from this player. How do I feel about this? I think it's a little too deep to really be needing to open shove 10s here from the button. You're over 10 blinds here. You have a little room to maneuver. You actually want players to play back at you and come over the top. Even a flat to defend is not necessarily bad because you have a deep enough stack that you can maneuver post-flop without just committing to one bet on the flop, and you are in position. I would simply min-raise here. A shove is certainly valid and certainly plus CEV. That's not in question. The question is, could you make more money by making a smaller raise rather than a shove? I believe the answer is yes. Again, without HUD stats, I can't know for certain, but I would almost always make a smaller raise rather than shove here. And there are a lot of other hands that I would make that small raise with rather than shoving as well here, so I can blend my range effectively. So once again, a profitable shove and a good decision, but possibly not the best of the available decisions. I would recommend a min raise here with this hand, and certainly any hand stronger than this. We do get a shove over the top and a fold. The shove was made with ace-9. I think that's reasonable. I think against most regs, and I'm assuming PGM being a member of Grinder School and playing fairly consistently is a solid reg here. I think ace-9 would be appropriate to isolate here, so a good shove here and a good ISO shove here. Nothing wrong with what either player did. And it looks like the 10s will hold and double up. So PGM has accumulated a nice chip stack here and moved into first place. 6s, this is too tight. You notice that he raised 7s earlier into more players than this. It's possible he's worried about raising and not being able to call a re-steal, which is why he chooses to fold. You should still raise here, and the reason why is because the loose aggressive player, you can call their re-steal. Even a player that's just kind of like medium in their aggression and their looseness, because of the odds, you could call here if you raised, and it's a fairly early position raise considering the number of players left. It's the earliest position available. It looks strong. And most hands that this player has shown down have been strong hands. So I would use that image and raise here. And I would raise hands much weaker than this. I'd be raising deuces here. So a little bit of a mistake here with the fold. Certainly should be a raise with the 6s. Looks like a walk here. Queen 7's not going to be good enough to open from the hijack. Stacks are getting fairly short, so that if you were to raise, you'd be committed by odds to call this player, and the odds would be very enticing to call here. Okay, we 7-8 suited for PGM here. We get a raise from the hijack. It's a min raise from a player who hasn't been overly active, and he's raising into a short stack. I'm perfectly fine with the fold here and declining the opportunity to re-steal. Almost certainly was the right decision. Okay, ace-5 here from the cutoff. This is simply going to be a shove. You don't want to make a small raise here because you won't be able to call Der Schlimm. However, you'd be committed by odds to call both of these players, and you don't want to play it post-flop out of position against the button. So you would just shove this hand. Looks like we do get a raise. A fold is the only mistake. I think a raise is marginal. I think a shove is the best play here. Looks like they just accumulate the blinds. Fold the 5-6 is fine. Okay, Jack-7 off would have been a shove for about 9 blinds, blind versus blind here. Since we have the raise before, the fold is perfectly fine. I would probably steal with this 10-4 suited from the button, especially as a chip leader. I'd probably make it 400, 500, 450, something like that, and try to steal this hand right here. Okay, looks like blinds have gone up. Every player is about 10 blinds or less. Makes the effective stack so. Looks like they moved into four-handed play. Queen 4 off here is going to be a shove. This is the bubble. That's when you'll be shoving most aggressively. And we have a short stack here who's already folded. I would shove Queen Deuce off into this play right here. Looks like we get a fold. I think this is a little too tight. You want to preserve your chip edge. You want to lean on this medium stack and use the presence of the short stack against him because he's going to want to cash. You should certainly shove this Queen 4 off. Shove to isolate here with the ace queen. That's exactly what PGM does. Looks like we get another call here. Every player did the right thing. The shove with the king 10 was fine. The ISO shove with the ace queen was fine. And getting involved with the jacks is fine. Every player made the right decision here. So we'll just see what happens. Okay, it looks like PGM has become a short stack. King high is going to be good enough to shove here. That's exactly what he should do. It looks like he does. This player should call any 2 cards based on odds. Looks like he does as well. All right. Looks like he will survive. Okay. This is kind of a peculiar spot. There's no question you have to get involved with the queen jack. The question is, how should it be done? I would recommend a stop and go here. If you shove pre-flop, there is 0 chance of this player folding unless he misclicks. I mean, he will call you. So I would recommend flatting this and shoving on the flop, being the first to act regardless of what comes. That's how I'd play it. Looks like he shoves pre. It's not that this is, I mean, you're going to commit no matter what. So it's not that his decision to commit is incorrect. It's the way in which he commits. Because if you call here for 300 more, you'll still have 800 chips to shove in on the flop. Yeah, it looks like that's correct. 800 chips to shove in on the flop. Well, that's enough chips to possibly make your opponent fold on some flops, and you're going to commit anyway. So why not call here and then shove the flop and give yourself some fold equity rather than flatting or shoving pre-flop and giving yourself no fold equity. So he's correct in his decision to get involved here, but I think a stop and go would be slightly more effective. We get a call with ace 4, and it looks like the queen jack will win, double up, and now he's moved into second place on chips. Go ahead and fold the 9 deuce. Not much for hands right here. Chip stacks are getting pretty equal. Excellent choice to fold the ace deuce. We get a 3x raise here. You'll have no fold equity if you shove pre-flop, and you don't want to stop and go. This is best to just let it go, preserve your chip stack equity, and use your 8 or 9 blind shove stack as just open shoving potential. So excellent choice on the fold here. I would choose to fold again here with the ace 4 suited. He does. Okay, this is a mistake. 8-7 offsuit for 8 blinds on the button is absolutely just shove, especially when you're pretty much tied for the least in chips. This is definitely a shove spot. The bubble is not the spot where you should play tighter, but at your most aggressive and loosest. So this is a shove here. Looks like it worked out into his benefit that he avoided these big hands, but in general you'll make more chips by shoving this. Okay, looks like we are still four-handed. Jack 10 off should be a shove. This is a missed shove as well. 7 to 8 blinds under the gun. I'd be shoving Jack deuce suited here, and I'd be shoving Jack 9 offsuit. So Jack 10 is an easy shove. A little bit of a mistake here. I like that he folded King 9 off. Shove the 6-8 suited. He does correctly do this. Good call with the kings, obviously, and the kings will hold. So it looks like he'll bubble on this one. We'll go ahead and move on to the next game. All right. Looks like this one goes a little more favorably. Go ahead and get started here. Queen Jack off is a fold into this many players this early on. He correctly chooses to fold here. I recommend raising in the 10-20 from the hijack with Queen Jack off. At least raise from the cutoff. If you're not raising from the cutoff, you're playing too tight. And to 5 players, my recommendation is that it's too loose this early on. So yeah, either from the hijack or the cutoff. As long as you're raising from the cutoff and later, it's okay. I personally prefer to also raise from the hijack, but that's a little bit of a stylistic choice rather than an automatic raise. Okay, we get a raise from an early position here into 7 players. 3x raise in the early blinds is pretty standard. We get a flat from the button. I would suggest folding against this initial raise if there are no other callers. When you get a single caller here for 40 chips, I recommend coming in because of the odds. Looks like he chooses to fold here. It's not a mistake to fold to a raise this early with ace-jack, even in the blinds with better odds. However, once you get another caller in front of you, you really should be putting in your chips here. There's 120, 130, 160 chips here, 180, and it costs you 40 to call. The odds are simply too good at better than 4 to 1, so you should be calling to defend here. A little too tight with this fold. Limp here from the small blind with a 10-8. This is too tight to fold as well. It's only 10 chips to call. There's like 70 in the middle. Odds are excellent. You should be calling not with any 2, but you should be calling with any suited hand here, any decent offsuit connecting hands, any reasonable hand, obviously. I'd probably call here with 10-8 off, 9-7 off, 7-6 off, 6-5 off, so on. And any suited hand, as I mentioned. So this is a little bit too tight as well. Looks like we got an elimination here. Not much for hands otherwise. All right, we get a raise from early position. No other callers. Obviously, we're folding the ace-deuce offsuit. It was a correct choice by PGM here. Fold the 4-deuce suited. Okay. There are 2 ways you can play this. Folding is a mistake, period. You can either limp or you can ISO raise. I think the ISO raise is the better play. If you ISO raise to 200 here and either of these players shove, you can call based on odds. It also makes it more likely to get the pot heads up. Even a 3-way collision, though, is not a bad spot with a suited connector like this. If you simply limp and this player shoves, you will have to fold, and that's a spot we want to avoid. We never want to put ourselves in a situation where we're hoping the players behind us simply check or fold, and otherwise we're in a bad situation. And that's exactly what would be done by a limp here. Folding is obviously the worst play. Looks like PGM chooses to limp here. Once again, I would ISO raise to 200. We get a shove here, which was expected. And he's going to have to fold now. And you could have raised it up here and had a collision that was very favorable with this dead money. So once again, a little bit too tight. He's choosing to play the hands that he should play for the most part, but generally taking the more passive approach. You should generally be taking the more aggressive one. Ace-3 off. We get a limper from early position. We're in the cutoff here. This is an optional limp. I would probably actually recommend a fold because of what happened previously with this player's shove, and this player may be likely to trap here. You also have fairly strong reverse implied odds if you hit your ace against an early position limper's range. So I would suggest a fold. That's exactly what he does. Okay, the 6s should be an open here. That's what we get. 2.5x is very standard in the 25-50. It's the same raise I make. We get a shove here from Zold.4K and 2 folds. This should be called. You should call this shove. Looks like he folds. This is too tight. Your odds are simply too good here. You have 75 chips of dead money in here, 50 right here, and you've already contributed 125. The shove is only for 15 blinds. You should be calling this shove with the 6s, possibly even with 5s, but you should certainly be calling with 6s. A little bit too tight here to fold. You'll notice that the tendency to commit some chips to the pot and then not continue with the hand will often result in a diminished chip stack of less than 1500 moving into the later levels. We want to avoid that. We want to move into the 2550 and the 5100 with a stack that can raise fold or that can re-steal effectively, and that will not be the case approaching it in this way. Okay, we get a limp here from the cutoff. And if this is a loose passive player, which I would be surprised if you weren't, you should just shove over this limp. That's what PGM does. Excellent play. He's got about 14 blinds here, which is actually 15 or less is generally what I recommend to shove over a single limper. At 14, I always shove over a single limper if I'm going to play the hand. At 15, sometimes I'll make an ISO raise, sometimes I'll shove. So he makes a good choice here, accumulates some chips. You notice how quickly those chips are regained by taking the aggressive route. It looks like he picks up jacks here in the small blind. We get a limp from the cutoff. He chooses to shove again. This is a hand that's definitely worth commenting on. In general, you should make the ISO raise here rather than shove over a single limper with the jacks. That said, there is a history here. The previous hand, he chose to shove over a limper. And by making that action consistent, it actually looks like he has a weaker hand than he really does. That being the case, I think the shove is actually the correct play here. It blends his range and makes it look less suspicious. He's more likely to get called by a weaker hand here. So he does choose to shove, and because of the history, this is the correct play. However, if no shove had been made over a limper before, the ISO raise would be the better play. But he does choose to shove, and considering the history, I think that's an excellent choice. He gets a call here with ace-jack, which is a good call in general. And he'll be ahead, taking the showdown, and it looks like he'll double up. Pocket twos here. Against the raise from the hijack, you probably don't want to re-steal against an unknown. Flatting this is also problematic. While you are getting set odds, you have two players behind you who could potentially squeeze as well. I'm perfectly fine with the fold for that reason. Sevens is an open. He correctly does do so. He makes it a min raise here in the 40-80 and after. This seems to be his go-to. I have no problem with that whatsoever. A lot of great regs min raise starting in this blind level. No problem with that whatsoever. Okay, queens here, a couple big hands. He does choose to make it 200 here. This is what I do have a problem with it though. 200 is my raise size in this blind level. 160 is equally valid. I don't think anyone is really necessarily better than the other. The 160 gives you a little less fold equity, but it makes your steal more cost effective. The 200 gives you a little more fold equity, but makes it a little less cost effective. I think both have their good things about them. However, my problem is in changing the raise size. Whatever you choose as your raise size, you should be consistent with it throughout that entire blind level, because it makes it less transparent what hand you have. If you're changing a raise size based on your hand against a good player, they will pick up on that and they will use it against you. So 160, 200, I don't care what it is. I care that you're consistent with it. And so this I disagree with. It should be 160 here because it was 160 before. We get a shove here. Clearly he's going to call with queens. Good shove with the ace-king, good call with the queens. Nothing wrong with what either player did. Looks like the queens will hold. How much for hands here? Let's see what happens with this 10-8. Okay, the walk here is too tight. You should either limp or raise it up here, depending on your opponent's style. If he's a loose passive player, I would recommend limping and getting him for cheap and stabbing effectively on the flop. If he is not a loose passive player, I would probably raise it up or fold it depending on his willingness to 3-bet. However, I have seen nothing from any of these opponents that would make me think they were aggressive enough that you shouldn't play the hand. So either limp or raise it up here. Folding is certainly too tight. Ace-7 would have been a raise had it been folded to him. The problem with getting involved here is it's not quite good enough to ISO shove against like a 21-50 stack. It's a little too deep, and you don't want to just flat call it and contribute 1,000 chips and let it go. So I perfectly agree with this fold. It's a disciplined fold by PGM and is the right decision. 10-9 off is a raise here. You can even raise it from the hijack in this blind level. You're certainly raising it from the cutoff into stacks to which you would not be committed to call should they shove. And once again, these players have shown no willingness to shove over the top, at least the remaining ones. So this is a steal. It's a little bit of a missed opportunity. You should certainly be stealing this from the cutoff. Jacks again here. Standard raise to 240, chooses to min raise, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. We get a shove here and a fold. He will be calling with the jacks though. And nothing either player did wrong here. Good re-steal with the 6 is good call with the jacks. Okay, it looks like it's 5-handed now. PGM is a pretty dominant chip leader. Perfectly fine walking with the queen 3. This is way too tight. The king 9 offsuit should be raised into these stacks. You should be absolutely willing to call loco shove should he make one. And you'd be willing to fold against Jimon's. You have to be stealing king 9 from the button. Even if both of these stacks had, like, say 1,500 chips and you'd commit yourself against either one if they shoved, you should still raise through them and still be willing to call their shove. You don't want a 3-way collision with this one. It's not good in a 3-way showdown, but still, you should absolutely steal this. I'd be raising this from probably even the hijack, so it's way too tight to fold this here. Perfectly fine to fold the ace-deuce from the hijack, however. Looks like it moves into 4-handed here on the bubble. Can't be calling this with the 10-6 suited. I have no idea why a player would open shove for 4,500 chips, but certainly you can't get involved with the 7-9 off. Raise from the cutoff with the ace-6 off, super standard. Min raise seems to be consistent with what he's chosen before. I do like that. He should be willing to call based on odds, Jimon's, or whatever his name is if he shoves. Looks like he'll get folds. Walk with the 9s. Fold here with the queen 7 suited. Alright, ace king is a min raise. Notice he's being consistent with his raise size here. I love this. Whatever you choose as your raise size, be consistent with it for that entire blind level. Alright, looks like we get a defend here. Flop his deuce 3-5 rainbow. We get a check. I frequently recommend to my students to check behind here. It's a board that you'll be floated if they have 2 overs with most opponents, and they'll certainly float you with a pocket pair here. And your hand still very much has showdown value. You have overs and you have a gut shot. I would just check behind here and take a free card. He does try to steal it, and he makes a very large bet to protect on a board that doesn't look like you really need protection on. It's not believable. I expect he will not get a fold here. I don't think it's a believable bet. If I did have a hand here, I would never bet this much. I'd probably bet more like 400, even like 350. I'm never betting 640 here. And with this hand, I'm always checking behind. He chooses to bet, and he gets called, and he makes a very large bet. Puts himself in a little bit of an awkward spot where now he's just going to have to try to check it down unless he wants the 2-barrel. There's really no reason to 2-barrel, though, because anything that would call you on the flop would probably call you on the turn. So he's just going to have to check it down and hope his opponent doesn't bet. It's definitely not a favorable spot, and he's lucky enough that his opponent does check behind, or does check to him both times. But his opponent could have taken this hand from him had he chosen to do so, and that's worth noting and why I recommend checking behind on the flop. Jack 6 off should be shoved here. It is correctly shoved. Queen 5 is a fold here. Ace 5 off is a raise, and should be willing to call either of these 2 short stacks, so they shove. Pocket queens again, it's going to be an easy call here. All right, we're moving into the money. PGM is the chip leader. We'll see how aggressively he plays this money spot. Shove the A7 off. He does correctly do so. This is too deep. You should never ever shove this deep. You should make it 400, 450, 500. Whatever you choose as your standard raise is fine. But make that raise. You don't shove for 22 blinds deep here. Just make that raise and be willing to call this player. And depending on how loose this player is, you can call them as well. Like, for instance, if I were sitting here and he raised into me with ace-10 and I shoved, you'd call me. And you'd be ahead most of the time. But against this player, if they shoved, you'd probably fold. It would take quite a bit of courage to shove such a deep stack on the bubble with the short one present. And most non-regs will not have that courage. So you should make the small raise, be willing to call the shove, and be willing to fold to this player, because generally when he comes over the top, he's going to have a big hand if he's an inexperienced player. Okay, Queen Jack here gets a walk. This player is once again shoving for 20 blinds deep. This shows fear. Players that open shove this deep seem to be afraid to play post flop, and it really is a good indication that they want a money and they don't want to give you an opportunity to come over the top. So this player has told me his mindset by how deeply he's shoving here, and it's information that if I were in this game I would use against him. Looks like we get a shove and a call with the same hand. Good fold with the queen 6. Should never be limping this short. Easy shove with the queen 5 suited. Good call with the ace jack. Fold the jack 6 off. There's a couple things you can do here. It's technically profitable to shove this hand. You can also make a small raise. Looks like he chooses to limp. I only like the limp if this player is loose passive, and I don't know that he really is. Don't bet this flop, however. It's very coordinated. He'll be able to call you a lot, and you'll have to shut down. He does get called, and you'll notice here he has to shut down exactly as I explained. Even if this weren't a queen, he'd be shutting down on the turn. He wouldn't be continuing to bet. So sometimes it's best not to bet the flop. Sometimes it's best to check, and you always have to consider that. And now he's just going to have to check down. He's at this player's mercy, really. This player could take this hand if he wanted to. He could steal this pot if he wanted to. But he's lucky. PGM is lucky that he chooses not to do that, because he could have taken this pot if he wanted to. Okay, blinds have gone up. Get a 3x raise here. Good fold with the queen 9 suited. You don't have much fold equity to come over the top, and you shouldn't be defending this narrow. So excellent fold. Probably shove over to isolate with the 8s. He chooses to fold. This is too tight. We saw this player open shove for 20 blinds with ace-8 offsuit. I don't see how you can fold pocket 8s for like an 11 blind shove. This is certainly a shove to isolate. Even if you lose, you still have 10 blinds left, and you're tied with this player in chips. You should certainly shove to isolate with the 8s. I would even do it with weaker hands. Never ever limp the button, period, in poker. Just don't do it. It's always a mistake. You should be shoving or folding with these effective stacks, and I'd recommend folding the 4 deuce. Looks like he's calling for the flush draw here. He hits the flush, so he'll commit. Gets this player all in. Moves into heads-up play. I might just shove all in over the top as a re-steal. I'm never flatting to defend at this stack size. Looks like, see, the reason why is because now this player has 4,300 chips. If you shoved all in, you either fold or you get him in an all-in situation. But like calling and flatting these bets with the intention of folding on later streets it's just a way to bleed off chips and give your opponent an opportunity back into the game. I don't recommend doing it. He chooses to make it. I know this isn't 3x here because of the program, how it adds the small blind on. So he's making it 2.5x, which is fine. And the player folds. This should be a re-steal over the top. Instead he flats. I would not recommend flatting here. And it looks like he check raises all in with top 2 pair on a fairly dry board. Not a huge fan of that play, but it does work out, and he'll take first place in this one. So there were some good spots here, some very disciplined folds, some really good shoves made, as well as some opportunities missed. There was some good and some bad, and there were definitely a lot of good spots to discuss here. I hope you enjoyed this. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me at againsttime@gmail.com. The same can be done for training. Take care.